was a brilliant student who overcame an impoverished childhood to attend Harvard University.
Brittany was destined for great things.
Jabrai Copney was a gifted songwriter who created music for recording artists like New Edition and Ryan Leslie.
He had written published songs to big-time artists, and he had a future ahead of him.
When these two first got together, it was love at first sight.
He had a passion for what he was doing, but Brittany did too. And I can imagine when the two got together, they just ignited.
For a while, the lovers seemed to have it all, until a shocking crime of jealousy and greed rocked Harvard's campus and exposed a shocking web of conspiracy that brought this hallowed university to its knees.
You have nefarious things going on behind the scenes. Drugs, sex, drug dealing. You gotta ask yourself, is there a gang running around Harvard, killing people?
May 18th, 2009, Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was a peaceful afternoon on the campus of prestigious Harvard University. But the idyllic setting was soon shattered by the sound of gunshots. Seconds later, a young man stumbles out of a nearby dormitory. He was clutching his chest and covered in blood.
He's shot, and he's bleeding, and he's dying, and he's gasping for air.
The wounded young man made it as far as a nearby walkway before finally collapsing to the ground. Witnesses immediately called 911. Within minutes, campus police and paramedics arrived on the scene. The man had suffered at least one gunshot wound to the abdomen and had already lost a lot of blood. And as EMTs fought to save the young man's life, the same questions were on everyone's minds.
Why did this kid come running out of a dorm at Harvard, shot up, bloody? What do we have here? Who is involved? What are they doing? Is this part of something much, much bigger?
Born in 1987, Brittany Smith grew up in Harlem, New York. And like many growing up in Harlem, Brittany didn't come from a life of wealth and privilege.
Brittany's mother was a drug addict and wasn't really present in her life.
Brittany's father did his best to make up for her mother's absence, working hard to provide for his daughter and to raise her right.
Her father was particularly dedicated to her education and really helped Brittany move along and achieve success that most people don't get to have.
Brittany adopted her father's strong work ethic. She kept out of trouble, studied hard, and helped out in the community, volunteering whenever she could. She also set her sights high and dreamed of one day attending an Ivy League school.
You have a girl who came from, by all accounts, an impoverished family in Harlem, and yet she dug out of that. She went against the odds.
And when she was just 17, all of Brittany's hard work seemed to pay off. After graduating at the top of her high school class, she was accepted into prestigious Harvard University, and she was the recipient of a full-ride scholarship. Brittany began school in the fall of that year. Her ultimate goal was to one day become a lawyer for a nonprofit charity back home in Harlem that could help other inner-city students like her achieve their dreams.
Brittany was destined for great things. She was into charity, she did great in school, she cared about her community.
But life in Cambridge, Massachusetts was a lot different from what Brittany was used to. And despite her best efforts to fit in, Brittany's background set her apart from the rest of her classmates.
It was quite a challenge transition. Although Harvard is a very diverse community, a lot of the African American students actually still come from middle class or upper middle class backgrounds.
Even so, Brittany had always been more focused on academic achievement than making friends, and her first few semesters at Harvard were no exception.
She was probably quite lonely and looking for a community and really focusing on her studies and not really engaging in the full college experience.
By her junior year, Brittany was well on her way to achieving her lifelong goals. But even though she had been willing to forego friends for study time, she still felt that something was missing from her life. Brittany was nearly 20 years old, and she still hadn't had a steady boyfriend or ever even fallen in love. But that all changed one weekend in 2008 when Brittany attended a party back home in Harlem and met someone who would change her life in ways she never could have imagined. An up-and-coming singer-songwriter named Jabrai Copney. Jabrai Jordan Copney was a gifted 20-year-old musician who found early success in the music industry.
He wasn't some wannabe. He had sold some songs that he had written, published songs, to big-time artists. And he had a future ahead of him.
A graduate of a famous performing arts school in New York, Jabrai had written songs for the R&B group New Edition and Ryan Leslie, and was well on his way to a recording contract of his own. Like Brittany, he had beaten the odds to achieve his goals, and when the two first met at a house party, sparks flew.
She was fascinated by this music industry guy, and I'm sure he played it up, and I'm sure she probably played up her Harvard identity for him. They both connected over their specialness.
Brittany and Jabrai stayed up all night talking and discovered they had a lot in common. The son of a New York City police officer, Jabrai had strong ties to the community as well, and his ambitions in life were just as big as her own.
He had success behind him, but he also had a passion for what he was doing, and Brittany did too. And I can imagine when the two got together, they just ignited.
The couple soon started dating. Brittany was thrilled. Not only was Jabrai her first real boyfriend, he made her feel wanted, desired, and above all, loved. As far as Jabrai, he was deeply drawn to Brittany's intelligence, drive, and seemingly unlimited potential.
Their love affair picked up really quickly. He made her feel secure and like he was the guy who was down for her. And then, in turn, she became very committed to him.
They fall in love, and he starts visiting her at Harvard, which is really a 3.5 hour ride from where he lives.
Jabrai took the bus to Cambridge from New York every weekend, but the couple soon couldn't bear to be apart during the week. So for her senior year, Brittany requested a single dorm room, and Jabrai put his music career in New York on hold to move in with her until she graduated.
Brittany goes against student regulations and has Jabrai move into the dorm with her. That right there tells you that she believed this guy was the answer to whatever was missing in her life.
With Jabrai by her side, Brittany began to come out of her shell and socialize more with fellow students. One of them was a young woman named Shaniqua Campbell, who Brittany met working at the Harvard Student Assistance Office.
She and Brittany quickly connect because they really come from the same background.
Shaniqua grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, so they're both from New York, both from economically depressed areas that are both historically black.
Brittany and Shaniqua became fast friends, and Jabrai liked the effect that the much sassier Shaniqua had on Brittany.
Brittany, she probably changed her character a little bit to try to fit in with the Harvard elite. Shaniqua said, screw that. I am who I am. Accept me for who I am. This is the way I speak. But look at my grades. They speak for themselves.
Shaniqua was the only person Brittany trusted to tell about Jabrai living with her, and she agreed to help keep the couple's secret. The three soon became inseparable, hanging out on campus together every day. With her new friend and boyfriend by her side, Brittany had never seemed happier. But she soon discovered living with Jabrai had its downside as well. Putting his music career on hold to be with her had seemed like a romantic gesture at the time. But with nothing to do, Jabrai started just lying around her dorm room and smoking pot all day, which wasn't what Brittany signed up for. But Jabrai assured her it was just a temporary setback. Once she graduated and they moved home to New York, he'd get his groove back, and the world would be their oyster.
She had a fantasy of happily ever after with her and Jabrai.
In the spring of 2009, just 2 weeks away from graduating with a degree from Harvard University, Brittany's future with Jabrai seemed limitless. But it was all about to vanish in a hail of gunfire. Coming up, while paramedics rushed the campus gunshot victim to the hospital in critical condition, police uncover a possible motive for the shooting.
Last thing anybody would expect would be to be held up at gunpoint in a Harvard dormitory.
And a shocking discovery points investigators toward the identity of the masterminds behind the crime.
They come up with a bag, and in the bag is a weapon.
Harvard senior Brittany Smith and her boyfriend Jabrai Copney seemed made for each other. Both were extremely attractive, ambitious, and career-minded, and in each other, they both felt as if they had found their soulmate.
They really thought of themselves as being lucky and special to have met each other.
By May of 2009, Brittany and Jabrai were deeply in love. And with only 2 weeks until Brittany's graduation, their life together seemed destined for dizzying heights. But the couple's storybook romance was about to come crashing down. On the afternoon of May 18th, Harvard's campus was brought to a standstill by a bizarre shooting at Kirkland House Dormitory. A young man had staggered from the dorm with a gunshot wound to his stomach.
He's shot, and he's bleeding, and he's dying, and he's gasping for air, and he's asking someone, help me, help me.
Within minutes, campus security and paramedics were on the scene. They rushed the young man to a nearby hospital for emergency surgery. But by the time he arrived, it was too late. He had already lost too much blood.
He died at the hospital.
What we have is this murder on the campus of Harvard University.
News of the shooting spread across the campus like wildfire. Meanwhile, police secured the crime scene and started questioning witnesses. They quickly learned that the shooting victim was 21-year-old Justin Cosby. But according to the student ID they found in his wallet, Justin wasn't enrolled at Harvard. Instead, he was a student at nearby Salem State University. But that begged the question, if Justin wasn't a student at Harvard, what had he been doing on campus that afternoon? When investigators searched the clothes Justin had been wearing, they uncovered some telling evidence.
What he has on him is a pound of weed wrapped in a shirt and a bunch of money.
Marijuana itself wasn't exactly a surprising find on the university campus, but the amount of pot, along with the large amount of cash, led police to an obvious conclusion.
A large quantity of marijuana, large amount of money. It's very obviously clear that it's some sort of drug deal.
Had Justin been the victim of a drug deal gone bad? Police reached out to other students on campus and soon learned of a possible answer.
Justin Cosby was a student paying for his own education. He decided to start selling drugs to make it happen.
But that wasn't the most interesting thing police learned from interviewing students at the crime scene. According to witnesses who saw Justin stumble out of Kirkland House, 3 other individuals had also run out of the same dorm building before fleeing the scene.
There were several eyewitnesses who identified observing 3 subjects fleeing from that particular area. One of those was wearing an orange and black Letterman's jacket, a relatively unique piece of clothing.
You think, who are these guys? Are they involved? What are they doing? Was it a setup? What happened?
When detectives followed the trail of blood Justin left behind, they found it led to the basement of the dormitory, where they found evidence to suggest it was where Justin had been shot.
Projectile holes are located in the walls with a semi-automatic type handgun.
Based on the location of the bullet holes, it appeared that Justin may have been trying to run from his assailants when he was hit.
We're going to be able to find a shell casing that has been ejected from this particular firearm. From there, we can start to look at a lot of different pieces of forensic evidence to reconstruct what did take place.
Detectives reviewed the dormitory security tapes, hoping to identify the 3 suspects, but they came up empty.
All the surveillance camera footage is pulled from around the dorm, and they really don't find much of anything. I mean, it's grainy, it's dark.
But Kirkland, like all campus dorms, could only be accessed with a student key card. Since the shooting occurred inside the building, that meant one of the 3 men likely attended Harvard.
We never really thought that Harvard students did anything wrong, but they do. They're drug users. Sometimes they cheat. Sometimes they get arrested.
And now it was starting to look like one of them might be the killer as well. Working off a new lead, detectives began trying to secure the keycard records from Kirkland House. Meanwhile, investigators performed a background check on Justin Cosby. Despite his pot-dealing side job, his record was clean. According to his friends, Justin was no criminal. He was a self-professed mama's boy who still lived at home.
Justin was very well loved in this community. He was like a big brother to many of the younger kids here.
Police also learned that Justin had been saving up money to afford his own place, so he and his girlfriend could get married.
Justin sounds like a really normal kid. So he wanted his education, and when he couldn't afford it, he worked as hard as he could.
And while it appeared that Justin had decided to sell drugs to supplement his income, investigators learned he was just a small-time pot dealer at best.
He was not a drug kingpin. Probably the most that he made off of any one drug deal was $10 or $15.
But why would a small-time drug dealer like Justin be carrying a pound of marijuana? Had something led Justin to attempt a bigger sale than he was used to? Or was Justin merely a middleman for a larger dealer on campus? If so, officers realized they might have a much larger problem.
Wherever there's that type of drug money, that amount of drugs involved, you have gangs. Is there a gang running around Harvard, killing people?
Hoping to find out who Justin had been trying to sell the drugs to, detectives obtained Justin's cell phone records.
The people he called may not necessarily be involved in the crime. We don't know, but it's certainly strong leads to follow up on.
Sure enough, the last person Justin Cosby called was a student at Harvard. Just not the type of student anyone expected.
Seems pretty simple. Let's talk to that person. Let's start the trail there. And who is it? It's Brittany Smith.
When detectives called Brittany Smith's number, they got no response, so they stopped by her dorm room. But to their surprise, they discovered Brittany wasn't a resident of Kirkland, but the Lowell House dormitory.
Brittany Smith is not living in this particular building, and she lives, in fact, across campus in a different dormitory.
But there was no answer at Brittany's door, so officers asked the house manager to open her room for them.
When the police actually entered into Brittany's room doing a safety check to make sure she was okay, she was gone.
Brittany's neighbors told detectives they hadn't seen her since the day before, which led police to wonder, had Brittany been involved in the shooting? Or was it possible they had another murder victim on their hands? Coming up, detectives inspect Brittany's dormitory for clues. And what they uncover suggests she had closer ties to the campus shooting than anyone could have imagined.
One of the guys running from that dormitory building is wearing an orange and black jacket. And what do they find in her closet? An orange and black jacket. How about that?
By May of 2009, Harvard University senior Brittany Smith and up-and-coming songwriter Jabrai Copney were in the midst of a passionate and storybook romance. And with only a few weeks before Brittany's graduation, the couple's future together seemed limitless. But that future was suddenly put in jeopardy by a shocking crime on Harvard's campus. 21-year-old Justin Cosby had been found shot to death inside Kirkland House dormitory. A large quantity of marijuana had been found hidden in Justin's clothes. And 3 unidentified men were seen running from Kirkland House moments after the shooting, leading police to suspect the murder had been the result of a drug deal gone wrong.
Justin comes out of that dormitory bloody. He's got a pound of weed. He's got money on him. And the cops have to look at this and say, is this a gangland style killing?
But detectives' gangland theory took a surprising turn when Justin's cell phone records revealed the last call he'd made the day he'd shot hadn't been to some hardened criminal or big-time drug dealer, but rather to Harvard senior Brittany Smith.
They went from the shooting itself to tracking down the victim's cell phone records to tracking down Brittany.
But when officers went to Brittany's dorm room to question her, they discovered she'd been missing for over 24 hours.
We don't know now if she's a possible witness. We don't know if she's a possible suspect. She could be a second victim who is now going missing.
Investigators obtained search warrants for both Kirkland and Lowell House dormitories. And within a few hours, they came up with 2 new pieces of evidence. The first was found hanging in the closet of Brittany's dorm room.
One of the guys running from that dormitory building is wearing an orange and black jacket. Very distinctive colors. And what do they find in her closet? An orange and black jacket. How about that?
Detectives immediately sent the jacket to the lab for testing. If it had been worn by the shooter, they would be able to find traces of gunpowder residue.
That is indicative of somebody handling a firearm, being close to a firearm when it's been discharged.
And in another dorm room in Lowell House, officers made an even more startling discovery.
They canvassed that whole building, start going through everything. And what do they come up with? They come up with a bag. And in the bag is a weapon.
The weapon, a loaded handgun, had been found underneath the bed of Harvard senior Katie Carson. And detectives were able to quickly determine the gun matched the caliber of the firearm used to shoot Justin Cosby. Katie insisted that the gun wasn't hers, but she said she had a bad habit of leaving her door unlocked, something her ex-roommate always used to bug her about. Police were inclined to believe Katie's story, especially when she told them who her ex-roommate was.
Only her former roommates would have known that she keeps her door unlocked, and one of her former roommates happened to be Brittany Smith.
Katie told police that she and Brittany had been roommates up until the previous year, when Brittany started dating Jabrai Copney and moved into a single room for more privacy.
All of these things are pointing towards connectivity between Brittany Smith and the individual who shot.
Katie didn't believe Brittany had anything to do with the murder. She'd always been too focused on her studies to get into any kind of trouble. But if the gun didn't belong to Brittany, whose was it? Police found a possible answer buried in the bottom of the bag. 2 student identification cards. But the IDs didn't belong to Brittany Smith or any other student at Harvard. They belonged to Alan Klein and Jason Butler, 2 students attending school at Harvard's biggest rival, Yale University.
What are 2 kids from Yale doing on campus, dropping their IDs inside of a bag with a murder weapon?
Investigators decided to make a trip to New Haven, Connecticut to find out. It was easy enough to track down the 2 students with the help of Yale police. When detectives questioned Klein and Butler, they both confessed to selling marijuana on campus.
These 2 students have no bones about admitting, yeah, we dabble in dealing a little bit of weed down here in Yale.
But the 2 denied any involvement in the shooting and claimed that the gun didn't belong to either one of them. However, they knew exactly how their student ID cards wound up at Harvard. Klein and Butler told police that 6 months earlier they traveled to Cambridge to attend a traditional Harvard-Yale football game.
Harvard and Yale, you can imagine that they have a bit of a rivalry, and it becomes a big time for partying where people can kind of have their debaucherous fun.
While they were there, they met up with a friend they claimed was one of the biggest drug dealers at Harvard.
They're like, we wanted to expand our operation a little bit. We thought maybe we could create this Ivy League cartel, if you will, of selling weed.
Eager to prove their innocence, the students were more than happy to give up their drug connection. But it wasn't the name officers expected to hear.
Of course, they're probably expecting the name Brittany or Jabrai. But no, it's not. It's Shaniqua Campbell.
They told investigators that Shaniqua Campbell wasn't your typical Harvard student. She'd grown up in New York's notoriously gang-infested Bed-Stuy neighborhood and brought that street-tough mentality with her to Harvard.
Shaniqua was proud of where she came from. That hardcore lifestyle. even a little bit of a gangbanger in her. That, don't mess with me, because you'll pay a price.
Klein and Butler said that Shaniqua sold a little bit of everything, including cocaine and ecstasy. And after the football game, they discussed a partnership to combine their turf. But when they showed up later that evening to close a deal for a large supply of marijuana, they were instead robbed at gunpoint by her partner, Jabrai Copney.
He doesn't sell us any dope or want to expand the business and get in on this cartel. He robs us.
They said Jabrai had two friends with him. They didn't recognize the two men, but remembered that Jabrai called the one holding the gun Fat Boy. Jabrai took their money, and as an added insult, took their student ID cards as well.
These were souvenirs or trophies that Jabrai had taken from his heist.
That the Yale students were willing to admit to selling drugs convinced police that they were telling the truth. And it made them wonder, had Jabrai and Shaniqua tried a similar heist on Justin Cosby? Could Jabrai and his friends be the three suspects running from the Kirkland house after the shooting?
Is that the three? You have Shaniqua, Jabrai, and Brittany. Is that the three? There's a lot of questions here without answers. Maybe they're all involved.
Back at Harvard, detective suspicions were confirmed when Brittany's neighbors told them they had seen Jabrai wearing the black and orange jacket around campus. But just like Brittany, Jabrai was nowhere to be found. Officers began to think the lovers might be on the run somewhere together. The residents of Lowell House seemed to think otherwise. They told detectives that Brittany and Jabrai's relationship may have started out like a fairy tale, but it took a turn for the worse shortly after he moved in with her.
People saw him as kind of controlling and quick-tempered and saw the kind of volatility in their relationship.
It was on again, off again. It was rocky. They loved each other on some degree, but it was dangerous.
Brittany's friends told police that Jabrai was extremely jealous, keeping tabs on her wherever she went. And while Brittany smoked marijuana occasionally, Jabrai seemed to do little else.
Brittany was a social pot smoker, whereas Jabrai, he was a daily user. He smoked weed all the time.
When Brittany was in class, they'd often see him smoking with her best friend, Shaniqua Campbell. But detectives now knew that Shaniqua and Jabrai had become more than just smoking buddies. They had also become partners in crime.
Shaniqua and Jabrai thought themselves as two hustlers, that they were smarter than, better than these kind of silly little naive kids at Harvard.
But when police questioned Shaniqua, she said she never met the Yale students and denied selling drugs of any kind. She only knew Brittany from working at the student assistance office together.
Shaniqua basically says that she and Brittany know each other, but she really doesn't hang out with her. She certainly denied any kind of friendship or connection with Jabrai.
Detectives weren't buying Shaniqua's story. They were convinced she and Jabrai were involved in Justin's murder. But several pieces of the puzzle were still missing, and one of those pieces was Brittany Smith. Coming up, the search for Jabrai Copney begins.
You gotta ask yourself, why would he do this when he has such a bright future ahead of him? What is he thinking?
And investigators get some help from an unexpected source.
Cops are like, where the hell have you been?
Brittany Smith had overcome incredible odds to climb from the streets of Harlem to the hallowed halls of Harvard University. And in 2008, the picture was made complete when she fell in love with a gifted songwriter named Jabrai Copney.
She thought with my Harvard degree and his songwriting career, we could be a power couple someday.
But after the shooting death of Justin Cosby on Harvard's campus, Brittany had gone missing, and Jabrai had become the prime suspect in his murder.
Jabrai saw him as an easy target to rob of his drugs, as they had done with some other students before.
Detectives learned that Brittany's best friend, Shaniqua Campbell, was one of Harvard's biggest drug dealers, and Jabrai had become her partner in crime. But it was still unclear whether Brittany was an accomplice or one of their victims. Police technicians performed ballistic tests on the handgun found in the dorm room of Brittany's ex-roommate, and it came back a perfect match for the one used to kill Justin Cosby.
There are unique machine marks on each barrel. We can go ahead and match those marks on the shell casing to that firearm.
And tests for gunpowder residue on the jacket found in Brittany Smith's closet came back positive as well.
You find gunpowder residue on that coat, and you retrieve gunpowder residue from that gun. And that residue matches the residue on the coat. You're putting everything together.
Since the jacket belonged to Jabrai, detectives believed they had their shooter, but the trick was going to be finding him. Shaniqua had denied any involvement, and police found themselves with no further leads. But all that was about to change. Over 24 hours after her disappearance, Brittany Smith suddenly returned to campus.
Brittany shows up at the scene, a day, 2 days later, and cops are like, where the hell have you been?
Brittany told police that she'd gotten homesick and wanted to clear her head before final exams, so she took a bus back to Harlem. Her story immediately threw up red flags for investigators.
So you picked this day? You picked the day that someone's murdered on campus that you're connected to? You go home? That's highly suspicious.
Detectives' suspicions were made even stronger when they asked Brittany if she knew where to find her boyfriend Jabrai. She claimed she didn't know him. She had a boyfriend, but his name wasn't Jabrai.
Brittany lied and said she was dating a young man by the name of Justin Combs in South Carolina.
From talking to Brittany's friends and neighbors, investigators knew she wasn't telling them the truth. But was she trying to hide her own involvement, or simply covering for Jabrai? One part of her story was easy enough to verify. If Brittany boarded a bus to Harlem, the station would have a record of it.
They pull some surveillance footage from the bus depot. And that's where they see something very interesting. They see Brittany and Jabrai. They're together.
The footage also showed Jabrai getting on the bus with two other men fitting the descriptions the Yale students had given police.
Most certainly connected Brittany to those two gentlemen, connecting them back to the shooting scene.
So now you have 4 players here. Now they have an answer really to the puzzle of who were the 3 people seen running away from the scene. Jabrai and his 2 buddies.
To detectives, it was now clear that at the very least, Brittany was an accessory to murder after the fact by helping Jabrai and his accomplices escape. But when they confronted her with the evidence, she refused to tell them anything else. And it looked like she was willing to take the fall for her boyfriend, no matter what the cost may be.
Her love was so deep for this individual that she was willing to, sacrifice herself for his potential freedom.
But just as detectives were gearing up for a nationwide manhunt, one of the suspects saved the police the trouble by turning himself in.
Jabrai now panics. I'm looking at a murder rap. So he goes to the Cambridge police and he tells this story.
Jabrai confessed to being at Kirkland House the day Justin Cosby was killed, but said he wasn't the one who shot him.
Jabrai explained that the intention wasn't ever to murder Justin. It was just to rob him, and things just got out of control.
Jabrai gave detectives the name of his 2 accomplices, childhood friends Jason Aquino and Blaine Fatboy Jiggets, and said that Jiggets was the one who brought the gun.
Blaine Jiggets was just your average killer. He was in possession of a gun that had 4 or 5 bodies on it, or so he said.
Jabrai told police that Shaniqua had chosen Justin Cosby as the target because she knew he was a small-time dealer looking to make a big score.
Shaniqua had been buying from Justin. Figured that Justin is a classic patsy, so to speak.
Jabrai said that the day of the shooting, Shaniqua set up the drug deal using Brittany's cell phone and told Justin to call when he arrived at Kirkland House.
Shaniqua was very wily. And in terms of dealing drugs, she knew how to get other people to do her dirty work.
Justin is now heading over to Harvard, and he's planning to do this deal, which is apparently going to be his biggest deal ever.
Jabrai said he met Justin Cosby outside the dorm room and told him he had the money waiting inside.
He had a key from Brittany Smith, so he used the dorm and he used the facilities like any other student.
I don't think Justin had any idea what kind of trouble he was in. He was a little naive, and he couldn't have anticipated what Jabrai had in mind.
Justin followed Jabrai down to the basement of Kirkland House, where Aquino and Chiggets were waiting for him.
When he got downstairs, out pops Blaine Chiggets, and they pull a gun on him and demand that he give him the marijuana.
Jabrai thinks I'm gonna get that pound of weed, and I'm gonna take any money that this kid's got on him. But it doesn't go down that way.
Jabrai told police Justin surprised them by refusing to give up the drugs.
Justin Cosby spent about $5,000 to procure this marijuana, then to sell at a higher profit. So this young man had a lot to lose.
Justin started to run. He had no weapons, anything. So he started to run up the stairs.
Jabrai said that's when Chiggets opened fire, and Justin was hit as he fled. Police immediately put out an APB for Blaine Chiggets and Jason Aquino, and then arrested Jabrai for first-degree murder. The question now was whether Brittany would testify against her boyfriend at trial. Her decision could mean the difference between Jabrai spending the rest of his life in jail or walking out of court a free man. Coming up, Jabrai's trial begins, and Brittany is faced with an agonizing choice. Stop covering for Jabrai to avoid jail time, or stand by her man.
This was the relationship, probably of Brittany's life.
My sense is that she will be haunted about this, sacrificing her life for this one person.
In the spring of 2009, Brittany Smith was only 2 weeks away from graduating from Harvard University. And she was in a passionate relationship with the love of her life, musician Jabrai Copney. But the investigation into the fatal shooting of Justin Cosby had exposed the Ivy League power couple's secret life, involving shady drug deals, conspiracy, and greed.
Here we have a pristine university, and yet you still have nefarious things going on behind the scenes.
Now, Brittany's life was in ruins, and Jabrai was about to stand trial for murder. Gunpowder residue on Jabrai's clothing had been enough for prosecutors to charge the 22-year-old with Justin Cosby's death. The question now was whether Brittany would testify against her boyfriend in court. To help entice Brittany to turn state's evidence, prosecutors approached her with a plea deal for a reduced jail sentence.
So they go to Brittany, and they try to turn her. But she doesn't crack. She's loyal.
This was the relationship, probably of Brittany's life. She wanted to stand by her man.
On April 6, 2011, Jabrai Copney stood trial for the murder of Justin Cosby. His defense claimed that while Jabrai was guilty of attempted robbery, it was Blaine Chiggets who committed the murder. Furthermore, they claimed Shaniqua Campbell was the mastermind behind the drug robberies, not Jabrai.
The Harvard Black Students Association had voted her a month before the shooting most likely to be America's most wanted, because she was dealing cocaine and ecstasy to the final clubs.
The defense claimed she was the one who set up Jason Cosby, and that Jabrai had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Jabrai's accomplices told a very different story.
It takes them a while to track Jabrai's boys down in New York. And they bring them in, they sit them down, and they point the lights into their face. And what do? They say he did it. This is all Jabrai's doing.
Blaine Jiggets testified that he'd brought the gun just to scare Justin. But when the deal didn't go as planned, Jabrai got angry and took the gun from him.
Blaine Jiggett's story was that he confronted Justin with the Glock and that Justin had refused to hand over the gun. At that point, Jabrai just got impatient, said, "Here, give me the gun," and shot Justin.
Things were certainly looking good for the prosecution, especially after they unveiled their star witness. Brittany Smith had proven to be loyal to Jabrai, but Shaniqua Campbell was more than willing to roll over on her former partner in crime. Even though she admitted to selling drugs on Harvard's campus, prosecutors had agreed not to pursue charges against Shaniqua in exchange for her testimony. And when she took the witness stand at Jabrai's trial, Shaniqua dropped a bombshell. She told jurors that Jabrai had targeted Justin Cosby, not only because of greed, but out of jealousy as well.
Brittany and Justin met at a party, and they knew each other. Jabrai was very, very controlling, and that made Justin even more of a target.
But Shaniqua claimed that while Jabrai couldn't handle seeing Brittany with other men, he hadn't exactly been faithful himself. Shaniqua confessed that she and Jabrai had been doing a lot more than just smoking pot together while Brittany was in class.
She said, yes, I was sleeping with my best friend's boyfriend the whole time.
Brittany was so devoted to Jabrai. I can only imagine the betrayal, the rage, the hurt that she felt from that.
Upon learning of Jabrai's infidelity, Brittany finally decided to cut a deal with prosecutors and officially confessed that after the shooting, Jabrai asked her to hide the gun.
Do me a favor, hide this bag. If anybody asks, you don't know where it came from.
Brittany's signed confession ended up being the last nail in Jabrai's coffin. On April 22nd, 2011, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison, without parole. For their roles in the crime, Jason Aquino and Blaine Fatboy Jiggets pled guilty to manslaughter, and each were sentenced to between 9 and 20 years in prison. At her own trial, Brittany Smith pled guilty to accessory after the fact to assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. As Brittany was led away to begin her prison sentence, most couldn't help but think about how someone of such promise and potential had sacrificed so much, all in the name of love.
She will be haunted about sacrificing her academic and professional life for this one person. I can imagine really will stick with her.
Was a single soccer mom with a secret dark side.
She found it thrilling to be a prostitute.
Her thrill-seeking ways led her into the arms of bad boy biker James DeVeggio.
She pointed her finger at him and said, "I want him."
It became a highly sexually charged relationship.
But this couple's mutual desire for danger would ultimately lead them down a dark and sinister path.
She had marks on her neck.
She was tortured and raped.
And when the awful truth was finally laid bare, it would expose a series of crimes so shocking and unbelievable, even the most seasoned investigators would be left speechless.
They were just bad people waiting to become really evil, and they were able to do that when they partnered up.
1997, Alpine County, California. A trucker traveling along Highway 88 pulled over to get a breath of fresh air.
He had been driving all night, so we decided to pull over, get some fresh air, and enjoy those mountain views.
When the trucker stepped off his rig, he noticed something lying on the bank leading to the highway.
So the trucker went carefully down the bank, and he came upon what he realized was a human. And he realized it was the body of a female.
Horrified, the trucker hurried back up the bank to call 911. But when paramedics and EMTs arrived on the scene, they discovered they were far too late to help her.
They quickly realized she was dead.
It was a tragic revelation, and a mysterious one. A cursory glance at the body by paramedics provided no obvious clues as to how the woman had died.
She was fully clothed. She had her backpack. She had a lunch bag.
Equally puzzling to investigators was the question of, who was this woman, and why had her body been disposed of on the side of this desolate highway? Little did investigators then know that the search for answers would ultimately reveal that this grisly crime wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a part of a larger and more horrifying crime spree, committed by the hands of two sociopaths whose passion and obsession for each other was only matched by their bloodlust, depravity, and desire for mayhem. Born in 1958, Michelle Michaud grew up the daughter of a career Air Force officer, whose job not only moved their family all over the United States, but also made growing up in the Michaud household a very strict, rigid, and almost stifling experience.
He was imbued with this military attitude of discipline, regimentation, obedience.
She was given strict rules, and she was supposed to abide by them.
While most of her siblings toed their father's harsh line, Michelle grew up resenting his stern discipline.
Michelle had an independent streak in her.
She wanted out as soon as she could.
At just 16 years old, Michelle dropped out of high school and ran away from home. At the time, her family was living in Sacramento, California. Once on the streets of Sacramento, she quickly realized that without an education, she only had one thing going for her.
She realized she had a curvaceous body, kind of enchanting green eyes. She knew that her looks were kind of her ticket.
Her ticket to bringing in cold, hard cash.
Michelle knew she had the looks. She had these assets. She was bright. She knew she could lure men into essentially giving her money for sex.
Michelle worked as a prostitute on Sacramento streets for the next 6 years. Then, when she was 22 years old, she decided to stop working the street corner and got a job at a massage parlor, where she began working as a high-end call girl, a profession Michelle didn't find degrading, but exciting, mostly because for the first time in her life, Michelle was the one calling the shots.
She found it thrilling to be a prostitute. She was the one in control. She likes power, and that's what she loved.
Outside of her day job, Michelle also enjoyed a robust dating life. She had relationships with dozens of men, a pair of which resulted in 2 unexpected pregnancies.
She had 2 children by different men, out of wedlock.
At 27 years old, Michelle found herself raising a son and daughter on her own. Not wanting her unconventional career choice to affect her children, Michelle decided to quit working at the massage parlor. She cleaned up her appearance and worked hard to give her children at least the appearance of a normal life.
She put her kids in Catholic school. She started going to church. She became a crossing guard.
But maintaining the squeaky clean facade of a suburban soccer mom wasn't easy for the now 37-year-old. It wasn't long before Michelle began to miss the thrill of her previous life. So instead of luring men into her bedroom for money, Michelle began hitting the bars with a friend to look for excitement. And it was one night when she and her friend visited a rowdy biker bar where Michelle first laid eyes on the man who would change her life. in ways she never imagined. 36-year-old James DeVeggio.
She looked over at James. She pointed her finger at him and said to her friend, "I want him."
Born in 1960, James DeVeggio grew up in Union City, California. But unlike the rigid and strict structure of Michelle's childhood, James grew up with hardly any guidance at all.
James had a very unfortunate upbringing. His parents gotten divorced. His father was a philanderer, many affairs.
By the time he was a teenager, James was causing plenty of trouble in his own right.
He was stealing and robbing from stores and gas stations. He was getting into fights at school. He dropped out of high school.
Once James dropped out of high school, he quickly discovered a way to support himself by learning how to fix motorcycles. He soon proved himself to be one of the best motorcycle mechanics in the Sacramento area, and had joined the Sacramento biker gang, the Devil's Horsemen.
When James got into the Devil's Horsemen, he kind of started getting a persona of a rougher edge. Yeah, he looked like a guy you didn't want to mess with.
James became fiercely loyal to his band of fellow bad boy bikers, but when it came to romance, he had a tougher time staying put.
He rambled through women. He got married about the age 20, had a child. Pretty soon he had a wandering eye. His wife divorced him. He got married again and had another child. James' second wife divorced him. Family life came second. He wanted to make sure, that he got out there with his buddies and he had enough to drink.
By 1996, James was a twice-divorced single dad with 2 daughters he needed to help support. In addition to working on motorcycles, he took a second job bartending at a popular biker bar in Sacramento called Bobby Joe's Roadhouse. It was there on an October night that a beautiful 37-year-old named Michelle Michaud began flirting with him from across the bar. James was immediately drawn to Michelle's appearance.
She was a sexy, attractive woman that got his attention.
But once she and James started talking, he quickly realized she had more grit and spunk than most of his biker buddies.
She looked elegant. She would drink champagne, but the stuff coming out of her mouth was just outrageous. I mean, she could cuss with the best of them.
James was taken in by Michelle's combination of beauty and bravado, and it wasn't long before their building chemistry exploded into a fiery romance.
It became a highly sexually charged relationship.
They were very synergistic. They brought a lot of energy out for each other.
In James, Michelle had found the thrill and excitement that had been missing from her life since she quit working as a prostitute.
Here's that Knight of the White Horse when actually it was Harley Davidson. He was a man, in her eyes, that was somebody because he was a biker, member of a gang.
And for James, Michelle's past as a high-class call girl was a huge turn-on.
She was strong, she was tough. He would both be rough with her, and she could be rough with him.
She's very seductive. He thought it was a match made in heaven.
And while Michelle's past as a prostitute had once calloused her to the thought of meaningful relationships with men, she soon found herself connecting to James on a deeper and more passionate level than she'd ever experienced. But the couple wasn't just a good match in the bedroom. They also shared a love for drinking, partying, and for picking fights.
He was a tough biker. He liked to be in fights. This is a woman who liked to go to bars, get men angry, and then fight with them physically.
But after just a few weeks, all the drinking, fighting, and wild lovemaking began to feel stale for Michelle and James. And the couple began to try and think of new ways to keep the excitement in their relationship alive.
They had to raise the bar. It has to get more intense.
They wanted threesomes. James wanted another woman to have sex with Michelle.
Instead of picking fights at biker bars, James and Michelle began looking for liquored-up ladies to bring home with them.
Having threesomes was kind of the high point of their sexual life. It was their fantasy.
But spicing up their sex life wasn't the only way James and Michelle worked to strengthen their relationship. In December of 1996, just 1 month after they first met, James moved into the rental house in Sacramento that Michelle shared with her youngest teenage daughter, Monica. With James and Michelle finally living under one roof, their intense and steamy relationship seemed destined to grow stronger than ever. But an unexpected and twisted series of events was about to unfold. Events that would unleash a wave of terror across the couple's hometown of Sacramento, and put James and Michelle in the center of a multi-state criminal investigation. Coming up, the investigation into the murder of a girl found by the highway connects to a larger series of shocking and unsolved crimes.
They pulled a gun on the girl and said, "Go into this bedroom."
And the evidence suggests there may not just be one killer, but two.
This couple were very dangerous.
The elected district attorney decided that these were some of the most evil people he'd ever seen.
When former call girl Michelle Michaud met biker bad boy James DeVeggio, she knew she'd found the perfect combination of passion, lust, and never-ending excitement.
They like to have sex together. They like to live a fast life together. Really kind of fun, exciting in the beginning.
The couple spent their nights partying at biker bars, where they willingly got into fights, and recruited drunk women to take home and participate in their sexual adventures. But the couple's crazy love affair was about to be put in jeopardy by a series of bizarre and gruesome events. On September 30th, sheriff officers in nearby Auburn, California, received a report of a terrifying crime.
There was a young woman claiming that she had been abducted, literally snatched off the streets into a van. She was tortured and raped.
The assault had reportedly occurred on a highway not far from the police station, and the victim had since been taken to a local hospital. Investigators rushed to the hospital, where they found the victim still shaken by the events. She told detectives she was 20-year-old Alicia Viejo.
She was devastated by this whole event. She's crying, she's shaking, she's trembling.
Alicia explained to the police that her ordeal began when she was walking home from school in her hometown of Reno, almost 100 miles away.
Her boyfriend had a flat tire and he couldn't pick her up from school, which he normally did, and she's walking home.
But as she was walking, she noticed a van driving slowly behind her. Before she knew what was going on, the van pulled up next to her, and the unthinkable happened.
They pulled up close to her and they grabbed her off the street.
Alicia told investigators that the man held her down in the back seat, while a woman drove the van onto I-80 and headed out of town. They were only a few miles down the interstate when Alicia said the man began to assault her.
She was sexually assaulted by the male suspect in the back of the minivan.
She was traumatized. She was terrified.
Once the assault was over, Alicia told investigators that the couple pulled the van back over on the side of the highway.
They ultimately decided to let her go, told her to walk away, not look back at the van, not look back at them, and she did that.
But that didn't mean Alicia wasn't able to give investigators a good description of the van.
It was a green minivan with dark tinted windows, black windows.
As far as the couple went, Alicia told investigators she wasn't able to get a good look at the woman, but she was able to give them a description of the man.
He was a white male, he was a large male. She described his hair, his eyes, his face, his mustache, his clothing, his smell, an earring that he had in his ear.
Using Alicia's description, a sketch artist was able to make a composite rendering of the male suspect, which investigators immediately shared with the media. And no sooner had the sketch hit the newspaper and television airwaves than detectives working the case found themselves sifting through hundreds of tips.
We got many calls, and we followed up on those.
But after weeks of working the leads, none of them panned out.
The Reno case went kind of cold for a while. It just seemed to be kind of a chance encounter.
Then, almost 6 weeks after Alicia's horrifying abduction, police in nearby Sacramento got word of a second sexual assault committed by a man and woman couple who sounded very similar to the suspects in Alicia's case. In this case, a concerned father called police claiming that his teenage daughter had been the victim.
He called Sacramento PD and says my daughter was kidnapped and sexually assaulted by a man and a woman.
The father told police that his daughter's best friend had also fallen victim to the same couple. And based on his description of the man, investigators began to wonder if this was the same couple who kidnapped and raped Alicia Viejo.
The description was very similar to the suspect of the large male, approximately 40 years old, a mustache. It was definitely the description that we saw in the Alicia case.
Police immediately went to talk to the two teenage girls. Rebecca, the first girl, told them that on September 12th, the mother of a student she knew from school approached her and asked if she wanted to go shopping.
She said, "Hey, I want to run some errands. Do you want to go with me?"
Rebecca agreed, but instead of running errands, the woman took her back to an apartment where she put a gun to Rebecca's head.
The woman held a gun on the girl and said, "Go into this bedroom."
Rebecca said she was then bound by duct tape. Then she was held at gunpoint and forced to have sex with the woman and her boyfriend, who was also at the apartment. Once the assault was over, Rebecca said the woman threatened her.
At the end, she told Rebecca, "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you."
Fearful for her life, Rebecca told police she was determined to keep quiet. That is until one day when her best friend Monica showed up bearing signs that the same thing had happened to her.
She saw the residue from the duct tape on Monica. She saw the duct tape and then saw the fear and anguish in her eyes and said, "They did to you exactly what they did to me."
Investigators listened as Monica began to tell her story. She told police that the same woman had approached her with what appeared to be an exciting plan for a last-minute road trip with the woman and her boyfriend.
She said, "We're going to drive to Oregon and we want you to come with us."
Monica agreed, but the road trip had taken a dark turn once they checked in to a Klamath Falls motel.
She's ultimately assaulted by both of them.
It was clear that both girls had endured terrifying ordeals at the hands of the same couple. But Monica then dropped a bombshell that completely upended this already alarming case. She told investigators that the assault had been even more horrifying because of the identity of the woman who assaulted her. The woman, Monica revealed, was her own mother.
She was sexually assaulted by Michelle Machado and James DeVeggio.
Her own mother duct taped her and sexually assaulted her.
Investigators were shocked and immediately set to work on tracking down the couple. In the meantime, detectives were able to look up an old arrest mugshot for James. It was a picture Alicia Viejo instantly recognized.
She immediately responded, "That's him. That's the one."
It was now clear that Michelle and James were responsible for 3 heinous acts of rape and abduction against Alicia, Rebecca, and even Michelle's own daughter, Monica. Within the hour, officers throughout California and Nevada were on the lookout for James and Michelle, intent on both bringing the couple to justice and stopping them before they committed another heinous crime. Coming up, as police desperately try to track down Michelle and James, the investigation unveils a terrifying discovery.
They had basically a mobile torture chamber.
And police uncover grim evidence that the couple's reign of terror has escalated.
On her body was a ligature mark around her neck.
This was a different case. This was a murder case.
Michelle Machado and James DeVeggio met and fell in love in Sacramento, California. Most people who knew them were surprised to see that the thrill-seeking party animals had finally found their match.
There was a dynamic there that fit right into both personalities.
But people's surprise gave way to raw shock and horror when the news broke that the couple was wanted for kidnapping and rapes of 3 young women, including Michelle's own daughter.
This case was extremely serious. The couple was very dangerous. They knew they needed to find them as quickly as possible.
But so far, investigators hadn't been able to find any trace of James or Michelle. And with no evidence of the couple's whereabouts, detectives began trying to track down the couple's friends and family. According to those who knew the couple well, they hadn't been spending much time in Sacramento, but instead they'd been traveling around Nevada and California in their green minivan.
They were traveling in that minivan and were staying in different places.
And according to one of Michelle's relatives, there was one place in particular where James and Michelle were sometimes known to hole up.
We found out that they had spent a fair amount of time up in Lake Tahoe gambling.
The relative told investigators that when the couple was in Lake Tahoe, they liked to stay at the Lakeside Inn and Casino in nearby State Line, Nevada. With nothing else to go on, investigators took a chance and followed up on the lead.
I called the Reno FBI office and spoke to the special agent, and he agreed to go over to the hotel and look for their vehicle, see if they were registered there. He called me back and told me that the vehicle was parked there and James DeBaggio was registered at the hotel.
On December 3rd, FBI agents headed to the Lakeside Inn, and there they jumped into action. A team of federal agents and local law enforcement officers cautiously approached the hotel where James and Michelle were registered. The team knocked on the door and then braced themselves for the worst, unsure of how the couple inside might react.
Criminals who are going to kidnap young women off the street, sexually assault them, talk about murdering them. We presume that they're armed and dangerous.
When the door finally did open, agents were faced by none other than Michelle Michaud. And to their relief, she was wielding little more than a look of utter surprise.
She answered the door, opened it, and we were able to place her under arrest.
But there was one person who wasn't in the room. James DeVeggio. Worried that James might run if he saw Michelle being led away in handcuffs, agents quickly began searching the area, including the adjacent casino, which is where they found James, casually playing a slot machine.
The FBI agent spotted James, told him not to move, or otherwise it would end very badly for him.
With James and Michelle both in custody, investigators began an intensive search of the couple's motel room. But it was when they turned their attention to the minivan that they made a shocking discovery.
They had basically a mobile torture chamber set up in there.
There was a lot of horrible things in the van.
The van seats had been removed, and ropes and straps had been fastened to its floorboards. Ropes and straps that investigators believed could be used in tying someone down. But in spite of the disturbing evidence, there was something else nagging at investigators. None of the victims they had talked to mentioned anything about a torture chamber inside the van. At least none of the victims they knew about. Investigators immediately began to wonder, were there any other victims that had fallen prey to this couple that they didn't yet know about? They were eager to ask James and Michelle that very question. But when they sat down with them, investigators quickly learned that their luck with the couple had run out.
Both said that they will not speak to law enforcement. And so we're kind of at the end of our rope as far as talking to them directly. We're not able to do that legally.
With both James and Michelle stonewalling, detectives weren't sure where to turn next. But the day after the couple's arrest, investigators got an unexpected phone call. Apparently, police in a neighboring county had identified another potential victim of the couple. Only this time, it wasn't a young woman calling the police station to say she'd been raped. Instead, investigators got word that a body had been found.
I got a phone call from Detective Pete Oliver from Sac Police Department, and he said, did you see the bolo from Pleasanton PD? And I said, No. Andy said, you've got to read it.
According to the report, the body of a young woman had been found on a steep roadside bank in the mountains of Alpine County, California. When CSIs arrived on the crime scene, they found bruises on the woman's body that suggested she'd been sexually assaulted, as well as other evidence that indicated she'd been restrained or tied down against her will.
What was found on her body was a ligature mark around her neck.
Not far from the body, investigators discovered what they believed might be the murder weapon.
There was a piece of rope not attached to her body, but nearby.
Next to the victim's body, police found a backpack. Inside was a wallet and credit cards, and an ID.
There was ID with her. They called us back and confirmed officially that they had recovered the body of Vanessa Sampson.
Detectives ran Vanessa's name through their system and discovered that a missing persons report had been filed the day before by the family of the 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson from Pleasanton, California.
Police read the report that a young woman had suddenly gone missing on her way to work just after she left the house.
After Vanessa went missing, 2 men had come forward to police claiming they had witnessed Vanessa's abduction.
2 men who were working on a roof nearby. It was kind of a foggy day. Heard a woman scream, and they looked.
When the men looked in the direction of the scream, they saw a young woman being pulled into a vehicle. A vehicle that had an eerily familiar description to investigators.
They saw a minivan, a dark green minivan.
If the drivers of the van were indeed James and Michelle, investigators knew that meant the couple had escalated their crimes from kidnapping and rape to murder. Coming up, a new witness comes forward with harrowing details.
This was how he could function sexually. It was the only way.
And investigators gain insight into a bizarre love affair.
That you told Michelle, now we're bound together for life.
When former high-end call girl Michelle Michaud first spotted tough guy James DiVeggio in a Sacramento biker bar in 1996, she knew he was the man for her.
She could tell a mile away who was going to be perfect for her, so she walked into the bar and said, I want that.
But by December of 1997, after a little over a year together, the couple's romance had hit the skids. Both Michelle and James found themselves locked up in a Douglas County, Nevada jail. Accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting 3 young women, including Michelle's own teenage daughter.
They were just bad people waiting to become really evil, and they were able to do that when they partnered up.
And investigators had just uncovered information that suggested this diabolical couple's list of crimes might also include murder. On December 4th, the day after James and Michelle were arrested, the body of 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson was discovered by a trucker in the mountains of Alpine County, California. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled before her body had been dumped by the road. And police soon found witnesses who told them they saw Vanessa walking along the roadway before she was stopped and taken by the occupants of the van, just like the one driven by James and Michelle.
The workers saw her abducted in a green van, the same exact description of the vehicle that James and Michelle had used for the abduction, as well as the rapes and their other crimes. The only difference is Vanessa was murdered.
But with no current physical evidence, and both James and Michelle refusing to talk, detectives were unsure of how to connect the couple to Vanessa's assault or murder. This is until 2 days later, when investigators got a surprising phone call.
I got a call from the Douglas County Sheriff's Department saying that Michelle Michaud had come forward and said she wanted to talk to somebody about a murder.
While Michelle was sitting in jail, she heard rumors about this body that had been found. She realized it was her time and her only time she would have to make a deal with law enforcement.
Eager to learn what she had to share, investigators immediately made arrangements to sit down with Michelle. But rather than starting the interview by simply confessing to Vanessa's murder or any other crimes, Michelle began by explaining the details and dynamics of her relationship with James. According to Michelle, her relationship with James had seemed so fiery and passionate on the outside. But behind closed doors, the couple had been experiencing problems from nearly the get-go, especially in the bedroom.
Despite his tough exterior, James had a big secret. He was impotent.
Michelle claimed that James's impotence got worse the longer they were together. At first, he was okay, he had little problems with impotence, but as time went on, it became a real issue in their relationship.
Michelle says she found the problem particularly frustrating, especially considering her past experiences as a professional sex worker.
Michelle was a prostitute. She was used to fulfilling men's desires.
Michelle knew what she had, and she knew how to use it.
They were trying all kinds of sexual different experiences with adults, with each other, with strangers.
But Michelle told investigators that for all her efforts, she couldn't solve James's problem. And it wasn't long before James began blaming Michelle for his sexual inadequacies.
He was done with her. He was done with Michelle. He didn't want anything to do with her anymore.
Desperate to keep her man, Michelle said that she then came up with a last-ditch effort to help James with his issues and save their relationship. She knew that he'd always liked younger women, and he'd once even expressed an attraction to some of Michelle's daughter's teenage friends. So one day, Michelle decided to help make James's forbidden fantasy come true.
One evening, Michelle brought a friend of her daughter's over to the house.
This was the same girl whose father had contacted the police. Michelle had lured the girl to the house, pulled a gun on her, and then encouraged her boyfriend to rape her.
This was how he could function sexually. It was the only way he could function sexually.
Michelle claimed that the experience re-energized James and their relationship, and it also left James wanting more.
James had a desire to experience other young teenage girls, and he wanted Michelle to bring them to him. And this time, he wanted Michelle's daughter.
Michelle said she complied with James's request and even participated in the rape herself.
Michelle's role was to go along, to facilitate, to help him in any way that she could, including participating in the sex acts. That's what this was about, helping DiVeggio, whom she loved, to achieve his goals, his evil goals of what he wanted to do.
Michelle claimed that the assault of her daughter had disturbed her, but at least James had seemed satisfied. And they didn't talk about committing any more rapes. That is, until a few weeks later, when they were vacationing in Reno.
They were heading back. They saw a young woman walking home alone.
They just were driving around and decided to do it and grabbed the first girl they saw.
That girl was Alicia Viajo, and after assaulting Alicia, Michelle said James became even more emboldened. She said that one day she came home to find James had converted the minivan into a sexual torture chamber on wheels.
James put a mattress in it, rope restraints, and a mirror on the ceiling.
With his van newly outfitted, James was ready for another victim. On December 2nd, James and Michelle drove 90 miles to Pleasanton, where Michelle said they began cruising the streets looking for their next victim. James quickly zeroed in on 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson.
DiVeggio saw Vanessa walking down the street. He told Michelle that that was the one.
Michelle claimed that after they snatched Vanessa off the street, they took her to the Lakeside Inn, where James began torturing and assaulting her.
She was brutally sexually assaulted, including the utilization of curling irons, the ball gag. The facts are incredibly horrific, about what James and Michelle had done to her.
Once the assault was over, Michelle told investigators that she thought they were going to let Vanessa go, as they had done with Alicia, Rebecca, and even her own daughter, Monica.
They took her to the minivan, and they put her in the back of the van, telling her that she was going to be released.
But according to Michelle, that wasn't what happened. After driving for almost an hour, James directed Michelle to pull over. Once again, James began assaulting Vanessa. But in the middle of the assault, Michelle told the agent he also began strangling her.
Michelle described the actual strangulation. There was some sexual activity going on. She was being strangled.
But what happened next was even more horrifying to Michelle. James insisted that she help him end the young woman's life.
When she was almost dead, DiVeggio told Michelle to come and help him actually do the final strangulation. After Vanessa had passed away, DiVeggio told Michelle, now we're bound together for life.
Michelle told the investigator that at the time she was thrilled to please James, and that she was so desperate that she would have done anything to keep James in her life. But her time in jail away from James had her reconsidering their relationship. And the haunting memories of Vanessa's murder had finally made her realize she was wrong about the man she once loved.
She wished it hadn't happened, but at this point, she was doing what she could to make it right.
Though regardless of Michelle's feelings of regret, her confession meant she was equally culpable for not only Vanessa's murder, but all of the couple's crimes.
They were clearly 50-50. There was no, passive bystander or compliant victim in these cases at all.
The elected district attorney decided, and I agree wholeheartedly, that these were some of the most evil people he'd ever seen.
Prosecutors charged both lovers with the kidnapping, assault, and murder of Vanessa Sampson. And almost 1 year later, prosecutors announced they would seek the highest form of punishment possible under California law.
We knew this was going to be a death penalty case.
Coming up, as James and Michelle's trials begin, the prosecution brings forth new evidence of another horrifying crime the couple committed.
That is a taboo that is rarely broken in this society, even by violent psychopaths.
And Michelle shocks the courtroom when she goes back on her own confession and unveils a new defense that no one saw coming.
Michelle tried to paint herself as an innocent victim.
She said, he had me under his control. I had no choice.
When James DiVeggio and Michelle Michaud first became a couple in 1996, it seemed there was little that could come between them and the explosive passion that fueled their romance.
It's like a symbiotic relationship where they really tap into each other's dark side.
But by January 2002, it had become clear that whatever the couple had tapped into was more likely pure evil than true love. 5 years had passed since the couple had been arrested. And as they sat in an Alameda County, California courtroom waiting for their murder trial to begin, the former couple looked more like strangers than impassioned lovers.
They were very meek in some ways, sitting next to their lawyers, just kind of like, whipped pups. They knew they were in a lot of trouble. They knew this was going to be very serious.
2 days after their arrest in a Nevada motel, Michelle had come clean to an FBI agent about the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson.
Once the dam broke, she just came out with everything.
But coming clean hadn't brought her any leniency from prosecutors. 41-year-old James and 43-year-old Michelle both faced the death penalty if convicted of Vanessa's murder. The prosecution began presenting their case by outlining the couple's criminal history prior to Vanessa's death. In addition to kidnapping and raping Alicia Viejo, Michelle's daughter Monica, and her daughter's friend Rebecca, prosecutors shocked the courtroom when they alleged that yet another victim had since come forward.
They also kidnapped and sexually assaulted James's daughter.
According to the prosecution, James's daughter had been 17 at the time of the assault, and she'd only reported it to police after she saw the news that both James and Michelle had been arrested.
That is a taboo that is rarely broken in this society, even by violent psychopaths.
The prosecution argued that while both Michelle and James participated in all of the assaults, it was Michelle who triggered the couple's devastating crime spree in a desperate attempt to keep James from leaving her.
She was in control. She actually brought the girls, she helped find the girls, and she brutalized them, raped them, and did all the horrible things that he did as well.
She was not under duress or a victim of James DiMaggio. She was an evil person in her own right.
But Michelle's defense attorneys argued that that wasn't the case. They claimed that while she might have whetted James's appetite for sex with young women, Michelle's blinding love rendered her powerless in the face of James's growing desire for sexual violence.
Michelle tried to paint herself as an innocent victim.
He had me under his control. I had no choice.
But whether Michelle was a victim or a willing co-conspirator would be up to the jury. On May 6th, they announced that they had reached a verdict. James and Michelle were both found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Vanessa Sampson. And just a few weeks later, the couple learned their fate.
We, the jury, hereby sentence James DiMaggio to death. And we, the jury, hereby sentence Michelle Michaud to death.
Most of those following the case were glad to see the couple receive the harshest form of punishment possible.
It was absolutely just. It was a couple who colluded together to murder and torture young girls.
And a couple who, once they came together, released each other's darkest desires.
They are an explosive combination and much more dangerous than a single killer.
It was the perfect storm of two really evil people doing horrible things.
Was a beautiful young college student with the world at her fingertips.
She had her eye on the prize of where she wanted her life to go.
Adolfo Constanzo was a charismatic male model who instantly captured Sarah's attention.
She was wooed by the charisma, the excitement.
Their friendship grew and she really fell in love with this guy.
But Sarah's lover was hiding a dark secret. In addition to his modeling career, Adolfo was also the leader of a religious cult and a kingpin of a Mexican drug trafficking empire.
The big-time drug cartels, they saw him almost as a godlike protector over their drug dealing.
Rather than be scared away, Sarah was enthralled with Adolfo's powers. But it wasn't long before their love affair took a dark and horrifying turn.
The smell of death and the feeling of evil was tangible.
It was like a chamber of horrors. It was full of blood and human parts.
Now, Killer Couples takes you inside this twisted tale. From first-person accounts of the couple's terrifying cult rituals to dramatic police interviews with their most devoted followers. All the way through the heart-pounding race to save the couple's latest victim. Where a discovery was ultimately made that was so gruesome and horrifying, it would shock the entire world.
You're dealing with black magic. You're dealing with human sacrifice.
I've worked over 200 homicides in my life, but nothing can prepare you for something like this.
April 1st, 1989. It was just before noon in Matamoros, Mexico, when a team of law enforcement officers arrived at a rundown ranch on the outskirts of town. They were on the trail of a missing American tourist, presumed to be kidnapped, or much worse.
The young man had vanished from Matamoros several weeks earlier. They didn't know if he was alive or dead.
At first, the ranch appeared to be deserted, and the team could find no sign of their missing person. That is, until the officers looked inside a small shed. Inside, they found a strange altar and a large iron cauldron surrounded by a disturbing concoction of dead insects, bones, and animal parts.
And the smell of death and the feeling of evil was tangible. I mean, all the hair on my arms, the back of my head stood up.
But officers made an even more alarming discovery when they looked inside the cauldron.
Floating inside this cauldron was a human brain.
They had taken my brain and put it in a cauldron to let it simmer.
Investigators were aghast and wondered, did the brain belong to the missing person that officers were looking for?
Who could be responsible for this? Was it the work of a local Mexican drug cartel?
The search for answers would lead police down a dark and twisted path and expose a startling series of crimes perpetrated at the behest of two dark lovers whose thirst for money, power, and evil knew no bounds. Matamoros, Mexico, a border town located just across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, Texas. Matamoros was also the home of Sara Maria Aldrate. Born in Mexico in 1964, Sara was raised in a devout Roman Catholic family. Bright and ambitious, she decided to attend college in the United States. At age 21, she enrolled at Texas Southmost College in Brownsville, where she began working toward a degree in physical education. And she was known on campus as much for her winning smile as her sterling grade point average.
She was very intelligent, a very good academic performer.
Sara Aldrate was not only just a stunning beauty, but she was someone who was well known on the campus at college.
For the most part, Sara enjoyed a fairly straightforward college experience, and she began dating a handsome fellow student named Gilberto Sosa. The couple enjoyed each other's company. For Sara, it was her first serious relationship. But in July of 1987, just as Sara was about to start her junior year, she was introduced to a new man who turned her predictable and mild-mannered life completely upside down. It happened one afternoon when she was on her way back to school from visiting family in Matamoros, and was almost run over by a flashy sports car.
She was just walking down the street, and here comes this guy. Just literally cuts her off.
Sara's initial anger melted away, however, when she laid eyes on the young man driving the car. He was apologetic, friendly, and extremely handsome.
He hops out of his car and starts talking to her, and she was wooed.
Sara was completely transfixed. He introduced himself as Adolfo Constanzo.
Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born in Miami, Florida, to a Cuban immigrant family in 1962. Adolfo's father died when he was little, leaving him to be raised by his teenage mother. Publicly, they were members of the Catholic Church, but privately, his mother was a secret practitioner of the Afro-Cuban religion Santeria.
Santeria is a religion of the worship of saints. It evolved out of slavery and African populations in the Caribbean.
Adolfo's mother kept a Santeria altar in their home and made regular offerings to the saints. She also recruited young Adolfo to assist her in her rituals, which often included animal sacrifice.
His mother was involved in those arts, and so he was there at her side and saw that and took a liking to it.
When he was still very young, Adolfo's mother had him blessed by a Santeria priest who told her Adolfo possessed a strong spiritual energy. According to the priest, Adolfo was a chosen one, destined for great power. By the time he reached his early 20s, Adolfo had developed a reputation as a fortune teller with an uncanny psychic ability.
Some people say he was able to see a little bit into the future. He was doing tarot cards, crystal ball type stuff.
But despite his talents, Adolfo's family struggled to make ends meet, so his mother decided to turn to a life of crime and employ her son's mystical abilities to evade police.
They were involved in petty theft, shoplifting, and yet they were never caught. Adolfo's mother really saw that as, look, it's working, we are protected.
But Adolfo wasn't satisfied using his powers for pocket change. He'd grown into a handsome young man, and at 21, he decided to move to Mexico City, where he quickly landed work as a male model. But it was his reputation as a practitioner of dark folk magic that really made a splash in the community.
That's when his notoriety as a psychic really took off.
He was running around with movie stars and soap opera actresses and generals and high-ranking Mexican officials.
It wasn't long before his powers came to the attention of Mexico's drug cartels.
Some of the drug leaders thought, well, this is something he could help us protect these multi-million-dollar drug deals going across the border.
Adolfo's magic earned him a position of wealth and power within the Calzada drug family. The world was his oyster, as long as the shipments arrived safely and he kept putting on a good show.
He was actually doing ritual sacrifices on zebras, on lion cubs. This wasn't your typical goat sacrifice that he had done as a kid. It was the entertainment value for a lot of these drug lords.
As it went on, he became more powerful and started getting a group together, a following.
One of Adolfo's first recruits was a young man named Martin Quintana, who became a member of his inner circle.
Martin was truly one that Adolfo turned to for a lot of advice. He was there for all of the rituals. He was really one of his top advisors.
In just a few years, Adolfo went from being an aspiring model to the wealthy, charismatic leader of his own Santeria cult.
He was making a ton of money doing what he was doing in Mexico. He had the flashy cars, the nice apartments, the jewelry.
Fate seemed to continue smiling on Adolfo on the day he was driving through the city of Matamoros and almost hit Sara Aldrete with his car.
It was just kind of an accident that he ran into Sarah.
Sara and Adolfo had instant chemistry, and the pair exchanged phone numbers.
She was wooed by the charisma, the excitement, the flashy jewels. I mean, he was beautiful. He was a model.
Even though she was technically dating another man, Sara couldn't wait to see Adolfo again and called him the next day. The couple began seeing each other. Adolfo introduced Sara to Santeria, and the young college student was soon transfixed by Adolfo's mastery of the mystifying religion, to the point that her attraction to Adolfo grew into something more.
They started spending a lot of time right away, and it developed pretty quickly.
Their friendship grew, and she really fell in love with this guy.
Sara quickly broke things off with Gilberto to focus on her developing romance with Adolfo.
It was an infatuation. They just want to be with each other. And then it grew into a more forged relationship.
Sara was deeply intrigued with Adolfo's spiritual powers, and Adolfo agreed to not only start teaching her Santeria, but to allow her to join his group of devoted religious followers.
He was teaching her about the religious aspect of the cult. She became a true believer.
Sara moved in with Adolfo at his Matamoros compound, but continued to cross the border every day to attend college in Brownsville. A fact Adolfo took advantage of when he entrusted Sara with the recruitment of new members to his religious congregation. With Sara's help, the cult members more than doubled. As both reward for Sara's devotion and a symbol of his love for her, Adolfo gave her a unique honor and anointed her the cult's high priestess.
Adolfo had the group call her La Madrina, which means the godmother.
He obviously loved her and showed her a lot of attention, showered her with gifts, with praise, gave her an unbelievably important role in his grand scheme of things.
Just months after their first meeting, Sarah had become completely devoted to Adolfo and his cadre of religious followers. To Sarah's college classmates, she'd become a completely different person.
She didn't stand out because she was this flashy, wealthy woman, but that changed once she got to know Adolfo, and people on campus noticed that change.
But Sarah had evolved in more ways than just her appearance. Little did anyone then know, there was a much darker side to Adolfo's religious cult. And no one could then imagine the kind of horrors the couple would commit to achieve what they wanted. Coming up, Sarah and Adolfo's unholy union reaches new heights.
Once she started knowing that he was in the narcotic business, Sarah connected Constanzo with the Hernandez family.
Until a fatal mistake threatens to take it all away.
I just had a gut instinct in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right.
When Sarah Aldrete first met charismatic religious leader Adolfo Constanzo, she thought that fate had finally brought her the man that she'd been dreaming of.
She was wooed by the charisma, the excitement, the flashy jewels.
Adolfo had also introduced Sarah to his own unique form of Santeria, a special blend of mysticism, folk magic, and animal sacrifice that had earned Adolfo fame and fortune from his ardent followers. Under Adolfo's guidance, Sarah quickly rose to the cult's ranks to become his high priestess.
He obviously loved her and gave her an unbelievably important role.
In Sarah's eyes, her love for Adolfo had no bounds, but the limits of their unconventional romance were about to be put to the test, and in ways no one could have ever imagined. On March 14, 1989, a group of students from the University of Texas contacted the Brownsville Sheriff's Department to file a missing persons report. The students claimed one of their classmates had gone missing across the border in Matamoros. A young pre-med student named Mark Kilroy.
Mark was a fun-loving guy that everybody liked.
He went over to Matamoros with some of his buddies for some fun and vanished.
At first, police officials weren't surprised by the report. Every spring break, thousands of American students made their way across the border to enjoy Matamoros' easy access to alcohol.
Every year, a few students would overdo it and go missing, only to turn up later. They get drunk and wake up in some place that they didn't expect.
But as the students continued their story, police quickly realized they had cause for concern. According to the students, the night their friend went missing had seemed to start out innocently enough. They'd all gone drinking just across the border.
As soon as you cross the bridge from Brownsville to Matamoros, there was a strip of bars, and they were all packed.
The students said they all drank and partied until the bars closed that night around 2 a.m., before they started making their way back toward the border bridge together.
Bradley and Brent were in front of us. Mark and I were walking, let's say 10 feet behind.
Since they were all pretty drunk at the time, the group said they didn't talk much, and on the long walk back to the bridge, they got separated. When they tried to meet back together on the American side of the border, they realized Mark was no longer with them.
I kind of backtracked after it thinned out. It was kind of like a ghost town.
When Mark still hadn't shown up at their hotel room by noon the next day, the group realized that something bad must have happened to their friend.
We were all basically terrified at that point. I just had a gut instinct. Something wasn't right.
And his friend's fears were soon confirmed. American authorities asked Mexican police to assist in looking for Mark Kilroy, and learned that several witnesses had seen two men in a pickup truck pull alongside Mark as he was making his way toward the bridge.
They were asking him, do you need a ride across the border? And he had said, no, I'm good.
The witnesses claim Mark tried to keep walking, That's when the men in the truck suddenly jumped out and tried to drag Mark back to the vehicle. But Mark was able to break free.
Mark kicked the door open and started running for his life. He went about a block or so, and that's when the next vehicle that was trailing, 3 guys jumped out with pistols.
Witnesses claim the second group of men forced Mark into their car and sped away. To police, it sounded like a classic kidnapping case by one of the local drug cartels. But what authorities couldn't figure out was, what could the drug families want with a student like Mark Kilroy?
Most of the folks that end up being kidnapped are tied to the cartels or the drug businesses in Mexico. Mark was not one of those people. He seemed like an ordinary college student.
But American and Mexican authorities quickly learned that Mark wasn't just any college student or spring breaker. Mark was part of a wealthy and politically influential family from Houston, a fact that made investigators wonder if Mark could have been abducted for a ransom.
The parents are well connected in the Houston area, and we're asked by U.S. Customs to assist them on this. All of a sudden, this case now becomes important.
Matamoros police jumped into action. They started by rounding up the usual suspects and known cartel members for questioning. But after interrogating over 100 known criminals, Mexican authorities were still no closer to finding Mark Kilroy. Mark's friends and family were beginning to fear they might never find him. That is until a random traffic stop on a Brownsville, Texas highway finally gave investigators the break they'd been looking for. On April 1st, 2 weeks after Mark's disappearance, a vehicle drove past a routine border checkpoint without stopping.
We had a roadblock set up, and he just drove right through it.
Police were eventually able to stop the car. Behind the wheel was a man they quickly recognized, Serafin Hernandez, the 20-year-old nephew of powerful Matamoros drug lord Elio Hernandez. And he seemed particularly unconcerned to have been stopped by police.
And he says, I don't have to stop for you all. I don't have to stop for any police officer.
Despite Serafin's beliefs, authorities hauled him back to the police station, where the known cartel member continued to laugh in officers' faces and boast that he was protected by a higher power.
He said he was invisible. He was protected.
Police officials were confused by Serafin's comments, to say the least. But before they had a chance to ask him what he meant, he caught them completely off guard with a comment about an old poster hanging in the interrogation room. A missing persons poster of Mark Kilroy.
He kind of looks like that and notices a colored picture of Mark Kilroy. And he tells them, I know that boy.
Investigators were stunned. Were Serafin and the Hernandez cartel responsible for Mark Kilroy's kidnapping? With Serafin spouting off bizarre proclamations and non sequiturs, investigators weren't willing to wait to find out. A coalition of U.S. and Mexican police officials quickly assembled and made their way to the Matamoros ranch, believed to be the border hideout of the Hernandez cartel. When authorities arrived, the ranch appeared to be abandoned, and their initial sweep of the property turned up no obvious signs of Mark Kilroy. But the search took an ominous turn when investigators opened a small shed on the back of the property.
They found this little hut with all this stuff in it.
In the center of the room, they found a large iron cauldron with a foul-smelling mix of bones, animal parts, and insects.
Several of the Mexican investigators instantly recognized the cauldron and religious symbols as representing Palo Mayombe, a dark religion that stemmed from Santeria.
Palo Mayombe is a sister cult, if you will. More of a cult than a religion.
It involves a lot of animal sacrifice and black magic. Very dark stuff.
Officers were unnerved by the discovery and suddenly realized this wasn't just the headquarters of a drug cartel. It was a cult compound.
The feeling of evil was tangible. I mean, all the hair on my arms, the back of my head stood up.
But why was the Hernandez cartel practicing black magic? And what, if anything, could this disturbing religion have to do with Mark Kilroy? Desperate for answers, Mexican police sat back down with Serafine. They also tracked down and hauled in the cartel's leader, Elio Hernandez, who was also Serafine's uncle. And when investigators asked the men about the cartel's involvement in black magic, neither flinched or held back.
They readily admitted that they practiced Palo Mayombe, and they believed that its spells could protect them from authorities or competing cartels.
But detectives wondered, what did the dark religion have to do with Mark Kilroy and his disappearance? That's when both Seraphine and Elio dropped a bombshell.
To their surprise, Seraphine admitted that they were ordered to abduct Mark Kilroy and bring him back to the cult's compound.
When detectives asked the men who'd given the order, Elio told them it was their high priestess.
Ana Madrid, ¿cómo se llama ella? The Madrina, the godmother.
He's been ordered by Sara Aldrete.
Coming up, Elio and Seraphine Hernandez tell police a grisly tale of murder.
They abduct him, and apparently he's held for a couple of days in this horrible little shack.
And as investigators learn more about the cult's leaders, they realize they have a lot more than just a homicide on their hands.
I've worked probably over 200 homicides in my life, but nothing can prepare you for something like this.
In March of 1989, 21-year-old University of Texas student Mark Kilroy had disappeared while on spring break in Matamoros, Mexico. After weeks of searching, U.S. and Mexican investigators had begun to lose hope of ever finding him. That is, until authorities arrested a well-known Mexican drug runner named Seraphine Hernandez in an unrelated traffic stop. Seraphine and his uncle Elio had shocked detectives by confessing that they'd been ordered to abduct Mark Kilroy. And that they had also been ordered to bring the American student back to his cartel's hideout, where authorities had just made an unnerving discovery.
Investigators had found evidence of dark cult activity at the drug cartel's hideout. Now they're hearing that Mark Kilroy was brought there, and they have to be wondering, what possibly did this kidnapping have to do with these very dark and disturbing cult practices?
Seraphine and Elio told authorities that the cult needed Mark for a black magic ritual, and that the order to kidnap him had been given by none other than the cult's high priestess, Sara Aldrete. According to Seraphine, he'd first met Sara Aldrete in college. Seraphine was also a part-time student at Texas Southmost College, and he and Sara had the same sociology class. At the time, Sara had just started dating Adolfo Constanzo, a well-known psychic and Santeria priest in the community. But according to Seraphine, Sara and Adolfo's love was founded on something much darker than traditional Santeria.
He said that they practice a much darker form of Santeria, Palo Mayombe, which involves dark magic and even human sacrifice.
Seraphine said Adolfo and Sara didn't try to hide their dark religious practices among other students. In fact, Sara had even approached Seraphine after their class one day with an offer. For a price, Sara told Seraphine that Adolfo could use his dark practice of Palo Mayombe to protect the family's drug business.
By this point, Adolfo's spiritual abilities had become well known within certain pockets of the Matamoros community, even the drug cartel's families.
Seraphine set up a meeting between Adolfo and the head of his drug cartel. A deal was cut. For a large piece of the profits, Adolfo would perform Palo Mayombe spells to bless the cartel's drug shipments to ensure their safe passage across the border. His first spell required a ritual sacrifice of a human being, a low-level member of a rival drug gang.
Era el sexto, se dedicaban ustedes a hacer sacrificios, ¿verdad? De vidas humanas. ¿Quién era sus cosas?
He just graduated from animals to humans, like, we would go from beer to whiskey.
When the Hernandez's next drug shipment reached its destination in the U.S. without incident, Adolfo's spell was considered a success, and his and Sarah's reputation and power within the cartel began to skyrocket.
He actually became somewhat of a god to them. They came to Constanzo for prayer, and their shipments were protected.
Adolfo became so convinced of his power that he decided to move his largest shipment yet, 800 kilos of marijuana. But to do it, he would need someone special to sacrifice.
Constanzo figured, you know what I need? I need a brain. I want the best brain you guys can find out there.
And for the task of finding the brain he needed, Adolfo turned to his high priestess, Sara Aldrete. Seraphine and Elio told detectives that on the night of March 13th, Sara took Seraphine and a few other cult members out hunting for their next ritual victim in Matamoros. Their target, an unassuming American college student.
He thought that he'd find the best brain within the head of an American college student, and it just so happened to be spring break weekend. So they knew that they would have their pick of the litter at the bars where the spring breakers were partying.
Seraphine said as their group wandered among the partying spring breakers, it didn't take Sara long to select who she thought would be the perfect victim, Mark Kilroy.
Mark, when he went down there with his compadres, probably had no idea what he was getting into. But somewhere on down the line, he had talked to her.
He told him he was going to medical school and everything.
She realized this kid is pretty smart. His brain will work perfectly for her spell. So what they did with Mark is they followed him when he left the bar that night.
Seraphine and Elio told investigators that since Mark was fairly drunk, he wasn't too difficult to kidnap. And once the group had him in their custody, they drove him back to their compound, where they kept him for 2 days until Adolfo was ready to perform his ritual.
He's chained up, having no idea what's about to happen, and then Adolfo comes through the door.
They get the machete, cut the top of his head. They take the brain, and they take it to Constanzo.
Pero te das cuenta que ya no habían
Elio and Seraphine told police that the sacrifice was a success, and the shipment safely reached its destination. But there was just one thing Adolfo hadn't counted on.
At this point, Adolfo's flying under the radar. He had been abducting transients and homeless people, some other drug dealers, so he really hadn't raised any red flags. That was until they abducted Mark Kilroy.
When Mark's disappearance led to an international investigation, Seraphine and Elio said that Adolfo was both caught off guard and terrified. The search for Mark Kilroy suddenly posed a threat to both the Hernandez's drug business and Adolfo's power within the cartel. Fearful authorities might be on his tail, Adolfo grabbed Sara and went into hiding. The question now was, would law enforcement be able to track them down? Or would the cult leader be able to conjure up one last spell that would help him not only evade capture, but also get away with murder? Coming up, the search for Adolfo and Sara becomes an international sensation as detectives uncover more of the couple's gruesome crimes.
Once they started digging up the bodies, Oprah came down, even did a show there. This was a huge, huge story.
And with authorities closing in on the couple, Adolfo and Sara turned to desperate measures.
Adolfo sees cops and he panics. He grabs a machine gun and he opens fire.
Sara Aldrete was a bright young college student working toward a degree in physical education. Until she fell in love with a handsome and charismatic cult leader named Adolfo Constanzo.
She was wooed by the charisma, the excitement, the flashy jewels.
Under Adolfo's tutelage, Sara traded the classroom for the black magic of Palo Mayombe and its practice of human sacrifice.
She was a student by day and a witch at night.
But the couple's dark romance had been derailed in March of 1989, when the investigation into the abduction of University of Texas student Mark Kilroy led detectives to question local drug cartel members and devoted followers of Adolfo and Sara's cult, Serafine and Elio Hernandez. Serafine and Elio shocked detectives when they revealed that Adolfo and Sara had orchestrated the kidnapping and murder of Mark Kilroy, and that the couple then used Mark's brain in a gruesome ritual designed to protect a drug shipment for a local drug cartel.
They had cut his head open and took his brain out and put it in a cauldron to let it simmer so they could ingest this stuff to take on the qualities of his spirit.
Following the horrifying revelation, investigators ordered a complete sweep of the couple's 3.5-acre Matamoros compound, where detectives thought Adolfo and Sara might still be hiding. By the time law enforcement arrived, they were unable to turn up any trace of the couple. They did, however, find a shallow mass grave behind the shed where the cult's rituals had been performed. In it, they found the remains of Mark Kilroy, along with more than a dozen other victims.
It was 15, 18 bodies right there by the temple.
We went out and got a backhoe to start getting all these people out that were buried out there.
No sooner had the bodies been unearthed than news of the grisly discovery, coupled with tales of the cult's human sacrifices, spread like wildfire.
Hundreds of journalists just descended on the area. Oprah came down, even did a show there. Geraldo Rivera. This was a huge, huge story.
People were legitimately horrified. For quite a while, it was the only thing that people would talk about.
But while television audiences around the globe salivated over every gruesome detail of the case, detectives were no closer to tracking down the couple. As the weeks passed, detectives began to doubt they'd ever bring the killers to justice. But once again, fate would intervene. On May 6th, while Mexico City police were conducting a search for a missing girl, they heard shots ring out from a window in a nearby building.
Just by chance, officers were going door to door looking for a little missing child, and it was the same area where Adolfo was, watching all this news coverage.
Unbeknownst to investigators, Adolfo Constanzo, along with Sara and two other members of his inner circle, Martin Quintana, and a bodyguard known as El Dubi, had been hiding in a Mexico City apartment building for over a week.
He rented an apartment in downtown Mexico City because they needed to lay low.
When Adolfo watched the news footage of the investigators digging up the bodies on his ranch, he'd flown into a rage.
He started trashing the apartment, turning over tables, shattering the television screen.
He went literally crazy.
Adolfo was convinced that law enforcement's infiltration of his compound had desecrated the area and stripped him of his magical powers. And it was in the middle of this tirade that Adolfo happened to look out the window and see Mexico City police going door to door. Even though they were working a completely separate case, Adolfo assumed the officers had found his hiding place.
Adolfo sees the Mexican cops out the window, and he panics. He grabs a machine gun, and he opens fire.
Constanzo goes crazy. He sees all the police down there. He starts throwing money out the window and gold coins and everything, and they have a shootout with the police.
As Mexico City police returned fire, nearly 200 more police officers arrived to surround the building. The firefight lasted over an hour before Adolfo finally stopped shooting.
They're going back and forth, and all of a sudden it's quiet.
Had the cult leader finally run out of bullets? Was he willing to surrender? Or were he and Sara conjuring up one last dark surprise for officers? As law enforcement prepared to break down the door to the apartment where the couple was hiding, no one was sure what to expect. Coming up, officers finally come face to face with Adolfo and Sara. And a shocking discovery that questions everything people thought they knew about the couple.
Adolfo said that he did not want to go into the afterlife alone.
1999, police had cornered cultists Adolfo Constanzo and Sara Aldrete in a Mexico City apartment building.
A huge gunfight erupted, and it lasted for over an hour before Adolfo suddenly stopped shooting. When the firefight stopped, police seized the opportunity and stormed the building.
Inside the apartment, they found two people. Sara Aldrete was cowering in a corner, while the couple's bodyguard, a man named El Dubi, stood in the middle of the room. But there was no sign of Adolfo. That is, until officers looked inside the apartment's open closet and made a shocking find.
Slumped in a closet, they found the dead bodies of Adolfo Constanzo and a second man, one of his closest followers and advisors named Martin Quintana. They had both been shot, once in the head, and were laying in each other's arms.
At first, it looked like Adolfo and Martin Quintana had both been hit by officers' bullets. But El Dubi quickly told police that wasn't the case.
Adolfo knew he wasn't getting out of this alive. He did not want to be captured. He didn't want to go to jail.
So he ordered one of his men, they called him El Dubi, to execute him.
Officers could understand why Adolfo would rather die than face justice. But why order Martin Quintana's death as well? El Dubi claimed that Adolfo did not want to go into the afterlife alone. So he asked the person he trusted and loved the most to accompany him in death. But after everything she had sacrificed for him, it wasn't Sara who Adolfo wanted to spend eternity with. Instead, he chose Martin, who Adolfo revealed had been his secret gay lover for years.
I'm sure Sara was just shocked. Here she has invested her entire life into this man, and she finds out mere minutes before his death that Adolfo was secretly gay and had been sleeping with one of his followers behind her back.
This very complex relationship, though, was kept quiet to a lot of people, and Sara apparently didn't even know about it.
It was clear Sara was heartbroken, and now, with Adolfo dead, she would have to face justice for the couple's crimes alone. When Sara's trial began in 1994, prosecutors were armed with the testimony of more than a dozen former cult members, which described how Sara Aldrete was directly involved in the planning and execution of all of the cult's ritualistic and human sacrifices. But Sara's defense team stunned the courtroom when they claimed Sara hadn't been a willing participant in any of Adolfo's grotesque crimes. According to the defense, Sara had been brainwashed by Adolfo and artfully manipulated by the cult leader at every turn.
She may have thought that she was an equal, but she was not. She was being used by Constanzo. She had no idea what was going on.
According to the defense, Adolfo had been deviously manipulating Sara since the beginning. Even the seemingly chance encounter that had brought the lovers together turned out to be a carefully orchestrated plot. Sara's defense team claimed that Adolfo had discovered she had ties to the Hernandez family through her ex-boyfriend, Gilberto Sosa. Apparently, in addition to being a college student, Gilberto had also been employed as a low-level drug smuggler for the Hernandez cartel. A surprising side job Gilberto had shared with Sara shortly after they began dating. But instead of being frightened off by her boyfriend's secret criminal life, Sara had embraced it.
She found being involved with someone in the cartel to be exciting. It was exhilarating that he was so bold and daring.
But Sara's attorneys claimed that Adolfo also knew about Gilberto's ties to the Hernandez family, and that he strategically pursued a relationship with Sara to gain access to the cartel.
Their meeting actually wasn't by accident, and while it may have looked like maybe he just stopped and saw this beautiful girl on the street, the reality was he'd been following her for weeks.
She claimed that she wasn't just one of Adolfo's victims. She was his biggest victim.
It was a compelling argument, but would it be enough to sway the jury? In late 1994, they announced they'd reached their verdict. They found Sara Aldrete guilty on all charges. The judge then sentenced her to 62 years in prison.
It's hard to believe that a woman could be taken in and just turn a blind eye to all of this. She kind of had to know what was going on.
For the family and friends of Mark Kilroy, the verdict did offer some solace in knowing that Mark's death helped bring an end to Sarah and Adolfo's grim legacy of terror.
Mark definitely did not die in vain. If it hadn't been for his death, who knows how many other people would be suffering.
As for the rest of Matamoros, the story of Sara Aldrete and Adolfo Constanzo continues to haunt this city. Most will never be able to reconcile how a bright young woman and a charismatic young man could be seduced by such raw and uncompromising evil.
Today's society, you see a lot of bad stuff out there. But this one you remember. You're dealing with black magic, you're dealing with human sacrifice, you're dealing with a voodoo drug dealer. This is one of those stories that's almost unbelievable.
Gazing at the stars in the velvet sky, lost in memories of a time gone by. Melodies of the past played in my mind, whispers of the wind slowing down time. Let the music surround us, take us away to a sweeter place where memories stay. In this world of dreams, we will find a little piece of soul in the music that binds, painting pictures in the colors of sound. Echoes of the heart softly resound, lost in